Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Clark. I'm the manager of legal research at TRACE International, and I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar about our new tool called the Matrix Data Browser. This is a development that we are really excited about. We think that people are really going to enjoy using it and are going to find it really a helpful complement to the country analysis that's already provided by the TRACE Bribery Risk Matrix. So I want to talk first for just a couple of minutes about the matrix itself. Here we are on the website if you're following along on the screen. Up here we have the link to, this is our traditional Bribery Risk Matrix web page. As of the recording of this webinar, it still has the 2017 data that will have been updated to 2018 by the time you hear this. But you can see that it's a ranking of countries and an assessment of the degree of business bribery risk that we believe exists in each country on the basis of our analysis of a number of underlying data points, ranging from the very low to the very high. Now, the map here is representing only the total risk score. One of the leading features of the bribery risk matrix, however, is that it is not composed simply of a single score for each country. It actually has a number of domains and subdomains that contribute to that score. The principle is that we think that bribery risk is ultimately a fairly complicated phenomenon. We don't think it makes sense to just look generally at the degree of corruption or perceived corruption in a country. There are many kinds of corruption that don't have anything to do with the risk of being approached for a bribe when conducting business in a country as a multinational company. So we, back in 2014, we asked ourselves, and with the help of the Rand Corporation, concluded that there were four main areas contributing to bribery risk. Those were interactions with the government, that is, how often are you dealing with the government officials, how common is it for bribery to take place in those kinds of interactions, how much regulatory burden and slowness is there that can be used as leverage to try to extract a bribe from businesses. That is captured in Domain 1. Domain 2 addresses the deterrence that a country may engage in. In the past, it's included analysis of anti-bribery laws and anti-bribery enforcement. One major development this year is that we've concluded that anti-bribery laws don't really, by themselves, make much of a difference in the bribery risk outlook for a country. Laws can be passed but not enforced, or a country may not really need to pass laws because bribery is simply, not something that happens. So this year we've replaced that with an attempt to discern the informal deterrent effect of societal attitudes and other factors that simply make bribery something that people are disinclined to engage in or disinclined to ask of business people. So that, along with the actual enforcement environment of a country, that ends up constituting Domain 2. Domain 3, governmental and civil service transparency, that speaks to the degree to which government processes are open, the degree to which financial transparency is in place, so the conflicts of interest that public officials might have can be readily determined. The idea supporting that domain is that the more transparency there is, the less people will feel like they can get away with taking bribes and demanding bribes. With less transparency comes greater impunity, or greater sense of impunity. A similar understanding animates our inclusion of Domain 4, capacity for civil society oversight, and that includes analysis of the degree to which there's press freedom, allowing journalists to investigate allegations of government corruption and expose them, bring them to the light, and then also the degree to which there is a strong civil society in a country. Those two together, we believe, have a significant, themselves both deterrent and exposing effect on bribery, and therefore end up reducing bribery risk. So, all of this is to say that with the bribery risk matrix, we're not just saying such and such a country is corrupt to this degree. We are saying, based on these 4 domain analyses and the underlying sort of sub-factors or subdomains that contribute to them, we think that this is probably more or less risky. But in creating this multi-dimensional matrix, our aim was to allow our users to really have a better understanding of what that top level number means. It's one thing to see, you know, a dark or a light color on a chart, but if you know why it is darker or lighter, that is going to help you make a more individualized determination as to what the risks are and whether and how your company is going to address them when doing business in that country. So that's the basic idea underlying the matrix. Well, we decided this year to take it a bit further. Now, as some background, each one of our domain and subdomain scores are based on data we have obtained, publicly accessible data from major international organizations, including the United Nations, the World Bank, Freedom House, Reporters Without Borders, the World Economic Forum, and about half a dozen others. Those figures are collected, some of them every year, some of them every other year, others of them a little less frequently. And in order to figure out, for example, how much interaction there is with the government, we take a look at information provided largely from the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business survey, which attempts to gauge how many procedures there are that are required to set up a business, how many meetings one has to have with tax officials in any given year, and a number of other relevant factors. So everything that goes into the matrix is coming from a data source. We figured that if we want people to be able to really understand what these numbers mean and where they're coming from, why not give them access to all of those underlying numbers so that they can see for themselves where everything is coming from? So that is what we've done. We've come up with a tool that we've called the Matrix Data Browser. It is freely available online, and it allows the users to take a closer look at the data, gain a more complete understanding of how the different countries compare to one another, not just, in terms of one number, but along many other different dimensions. And also, and we'll get to seeing this a little bit later, seeing how those underlying numbers have changed over time. So let's, before we go further, let's just go up here and type in the URL for this. It is matrixbrowser.traceinternational.org. And that should take you right here to some introductory text, providing some basic information about the matrix and about the browser and about TRACE. The meat of it, though, is up here. We've got links for the matrix itself, which is quite similar, as you see, to what you saw on the earlier page, with a couple of important additions. First of all, most obviously, it shows you the ranking top to bottom, and you can just scroll all the way through all 200. And no doubt you're noticing on the right side of the screen the color here changing from a saturated blue into a white and into a saturated red. That is a way to visually signal, is this country less risky or more risky? It's fairly intuitive in that respect. But there are some other things worth noting here. First of all, this table is completely sortable, so if you wanted the countries to be listed in alphabetical order instead of by rank, you just click on country, and then you can scroll down and find the one you want. If you want to see which has the best or the least risky assessment in any given domain, you can click on those. See that New Zealand does well in opportunity. Luxembourg seems to be on top in terms of deterrence, transparency. Sweden and Norway have got it covered. Oversight, Norway and Denmark. And again, standing alone, those numbers, they signify something, but you may want to know a little more about what they signify. So we will get further into that as we move to the right here in our different information screens. A couple of other things I want to point out. The underlying data points we use, I don't know if any of them are produced for every country that we include in the matrix. Some of them only cover countries in at a certain stage of development. Others are interested in particular regions. And this is a common issue with corruption indexes generally, that the sources on which they rely in composing their rankings don't have equal coverage for each country. Now, the aim of the data browser here is to be as clear and transparent as possible about how much we do understand about each country based on the data, and how much of it may just be a bit of an extrapolation from a country that has less data available than others. That's what this basis column is for. Basis is simply a decimal number indicating what fraction of the total number of data points are included in the for any given country. So clicking on here, we can see that, yeah, there are some countries that don't have a lot of data points, a lot of them being small islands or very small countries, or countries that are politically isolated enough that there just isn't a lot of information about them. We've included them in the matrix because we want to give as broad a picture as possible of our best assessment of bribery risk worldwide. But we recognize where there's less data, then necessarily the conclusions are going to be less robust. In contrast, if we sort it in the other direction, we can see that there are, in fact, a good number of countries that have every single data point available, and others that, may be missing 1, 2, 3, so forth and so on. So that gives you a good sense of whether the country score is, based on extensive information or perhaps on more limited information. Total score, that is, of course, the main reported number that we use. Deviation. Now, this one I want to take a little extra time to talk about because it's pretty important to understanding some of the later information screens. Take a look over here. I'm gonna move just a little bit into statistics talk. Mean total score, median total score, standard deviation. What does this mean? Well, mean total score, that just means the average. All of the scores added up and then divided by, I guess in this case, 200, the total number of countries. That means in the middle. Median is the score where you have the same number of scores on the left and the same number of scores on the right. So it is the score that itself lands sort of in the middle of the pile. Now, the critical point to understand is that when you have a bunch of countries or really anything that you're evaluating where there are some things that are really good and some things that are really bad, a lot of the time, much of the time, most of the time, most of the things are going to be sort of in the middle. That's the famous normal distribution curve. It starts out low, goes up in the middle, and then goes down again at the end. The mean and the median together tell you basically where the middle of that is and where basically where the hump is. The further away you get, the fewer countries are going to be there, and the more severe the risk, if you're on the wrong side of it, or the more secure you can feel if you're on the right side of it. Now the question is, how far is far away? And that's what we mean by standard deviation. That's a statistically generated number that basically says this is the count that you have to go in either direction to say that you are, more or less within the middle, or sort of far out from the middle, or way far out from the middle. So, although we primarily report the total score as a number from 1 to 100, because that's sort of pretty easy and intuitive to sort of get a sense of what that means. 1 means low risk, 100 means high risk, and then something in the middle means something in the middle. But from a statistical perspective, what we really want to know is how significantly far away from the middle is it? And that is measured in standard deviations. Our rule of thumb is that we will call a country medium risk if it is within a 1 standard deviation range close to the mean score. If it's further than half a standard deviation out on either side, but less than 1.5 standard deviations, we'll call it either a high risk or a low risk, depending on the direction. If it is more than 1.5 standard deviations out from the mean, then we will call it a very high risk or a very low risk. So that's how we sort of summarize the risk level. But really what we're talking about is simply the number of standard deviations away. And that is what we have represented here under deviation. Now you'll see if we sort it by deviation, we end up with the same sorting as the rank. And what we see is we've got maybe 23 countries here that are 1.5 standard deviations or more better than the average. And in this case, remember, lower numbers are less risk, higher numbers are more risk. So negative 2.54 standard deviations out means, well, that's a very, very low risk. 2 standard deviations, 1.9, 1.5, those are all pretty very low. When we start getting into this range, these are still low risk, but less dramatically so. Not going to make any headlines with these risk levels, but generally these are not among the bad places in terms of bribery risk. Between negative 0.5 and 0.5, you can see the color is really pale. These are sort of the middle of the pack. As we get past 0.5 standard deviations, we getting into the riskier areas. And then once we jump past 1.5, you can see we are in some of the most risky places in the world in terms of bribery happening. So I point that out not just so that you know what this column means, but so that you have a sense of how things are clustered, that most countries are more or less in the middle. And one thing you'll also notice, as you get to the ends, there's more pronounced difference from one to the other. You don't get a lot of exactly the same standard deviation. Whereas in the middle, things are very close together. This is important because a lot of times when people take a look at these corruption indexes, they will ask, well, how many places in the ranking did such and such a country move? Who's doing better? Who's doing worse? How many places have they moved? Now, there are a lot of reasons why questions like that are problematic. One of those is especially relevant when you're talking about countries that are in the middle, because they are so close together. The slightest little perturbation or difference in one or another of the underlying data points can cause a jump of 10, 20 places without really changing the level of risk in any meaningful way. So that's a really important thing to understand. Not only are these kinds of indexes necessarily imprecise, even though we go ahead and report the standard deviations to 2 decimal places, that does not reflect the degree of certainty with which we are drawing our assessment. But even apart from that inherent lack of certainty, the idea of only looking at the ranking, the position in the chart, of a country and saying, oh, things have gotten better or things have gotten worse. I just don't think that you can make that kind of assessment based on its position in a total ranking of countries. Now, does that mean you can't say anything at all about are things getting better, are things getting worse? You can. It requires taking a closer look at the underlying data points and looking at the trends in those underlying data points. So we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. I'm going to very briefly jump over the by continent and subdomain scores screen. This is simply a way of comparing countries within the same geographic region, and it's not, very complexly parsed out. It's just the 6 inhabited continents. But within each of those, you can see which countries are best within that continent, which are the most risky within that continent. And if you want to compare continents to one another, you can see that each one has its own mean, median, and standard deviation. So if we compare, say, North America to Europe, well, we can see Europe's mean is 31.8, which is pretty low. North America, 51.2, which is right in the middle. Europe's standard deviation is a little bit bigger. I wouldn't want to draw too much from that, but that is just a very quick and dirty way of getting an overview of risk levels. And again, grouping them by physical continent is a very crude way of doing it. So I wouldn't put too much stock in that comparison, but it can nevertheless be something that one is curious about, interested in, and so that's why we have that there. Skipping over countries for the moment, we have a similar thing here with subdomain scores. We talked about how each domain is made up of a number of subdomains, and this is where you can actually get a look at those subdomain numbers. Now, we refer to the domains and the subdomains in the Matrix data browser with sort of shorthand names. The 4 domains, obviously, opportunity, deterrence, transparency, and oversight. Within opportunity, we have interaction, the amount of contact you have, expectation, how common bribery is generally, and leverage, bureaucratic red tape and slowdown and chance to make life difficult for you if you don't pay a bribe. And then those together combine to create the opportunity score. A brief word about this. All of these scores are initially calculated using a scale that has its center at 0 and that has a standard deviation of 1. You don't need to understand exactly what that means, but that is the scale that they are all calculated in. And then once all of them are calculated, then the resulting numbers are rescaled from 1 to 100. What that means is this. The opportunity score, that is the domain score, is the average of the 3 contributing subdomain scores. But wait, 8, 5, and 7, the average of those isn't anything close to 1. Correct. But the average of the originally scaled numbers is, in fact, the lowest of any of the countries. And so when that number gets rescaled, it ends up corresponding to 1. So that is why, even though we say this is the average of these, That's not going to be reflected in the number, which is actually good because that tells you something more that you might not have known otherwise. 857, well, that sounds, well, good, obviously, but, you know, Singapore has 31, 1, and 1. Isn't that better? It's got 2 1s. Well, no, because averaging them all together, New Zealand comes out just a little bit better. So having it 1 to 4 is, we believe, an apt comparison in that case. You can do the same thing with deterrence, which is made up of what we call dissuasion, the informal constraining and deterring effect of societal attitudes, and enforcement, which is the country's overall ability and will to enforce its anti-corruption laws and laws generally, which then combine to give us the deterrence score. Transparency, the subdomains here we refer to as processes and interest, and for oversight, free press, and civil society. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, well, you've talked about all of these subdomains, you've given them catchy little names, but what do they really mean? Where do those numbers come from? That's what we want to look at now. So let me click on countries. Here we go. This gives us a summary of whichever country you want to look at. I'm going to pick Argentina. You can see it's right in the middle. It's got a pretty bad opportunity score. Not the worst in the world, 1.2 standard deviations away. Although on interaction, it's pretty bad on interaction. Expectation is still more or less in the middle, on the worst side of the middle, at 0.45 standard deviations away. Leverage, it's pretty bad, almost as bad as interaction. Deterrence, you know, not great, but still within the range of normal. Transparency, within the range of normal, but on the good side. And oversight actually does a pretty good job, has a pretty strong civil society. And how do we know all this, you ask? Well, let's click on a given subdomain, and here you see every single data point that feeds into this score. Our interaction subdomain is calculated with information from the World Bank, from CEPII, which is the publisher of the Institutional Profiles database, and then one data point as well from the International Labor Organization regarding the share of government employment. For each one of these, you can see the actual original value given to that country for this, for each of these questions in the original scaling. And then you may want to know, is 22 for procedures to obtain a construction permit? Is that a good number? Is that a bad number? How would I know? Well, you can get a sense of it by asking yourself, what's the best number? 7 in this case. What's the worst number that any country got? 30.1. And the average worldwide, 15. So that means 22 is somewhere on this side of the bad side of average. Now, this right here, this badness column, do not rely on that for any kind of statistical validity. It is a very improvised and informal assessment of how bad is this number. It basically asks which side is the number on of the average and how far over is it, and comes up with a percentage that approximates, is it the worst, is it the best, is it somewhere in the middle? And that is the number that is reflected in the length, the bar chart style length of these little red indicators. Now this gives you a nice visual sense of where's the problem. And we can see, well, there's problems all around, though they seem to have less problem with export, the time it takes to deal with documentary compliance in the export context. They seem to be more or less average, even just slightly on the good side when it comes to senior management dealing with government regulation. But in terms of procedures, whether it's electricity or construction or business, starting a business, not good. Not the worst. 73% badness, 68% badness, not the worst by any stretch. But taken cumulatively, taken as a whole, and how we do it is we scale each one of these numbers, and then we take the average, and that is what we get. A overall interaction score of 1.619, and again, that's more decimal places than is really warranted. But for the sake of including everything we've got. Now we can look at other ones too. Free press, you can see, okay, they do better here. Not in every way, and this is important, not every source has the same viewpoint. A lot of these are somewhat subjective. A lot of them are sort of the assessments made by experts, but different experts can have different viewpoints. So the Institutional Profiles database, they give Argentina a score of 2 out of 4 on freedom of the press, which, you know, the average is 2.74. While the Bertelsmann Transformation Index, they give them a 9 out of 10. Who's right? Who can say? But what we can do is take them all collectively, take an average, and that can give us a decent sense, and it can allow us to roughly compare Argentina's press freedom with that of other countries. Again, none of these numbers are perfect representations of anything. They are rough attempts to get a sense of the basic environment. Civil society, here, Argentina does better. It's not perfect on any of these measures. Civic participation, non-governmental checks on government powers, human development, society's mobilization to take up challenges. No perfect scores anywhere, but they're all good. So they end up being almost a full standard deviation better than the norm when it comes to civil society. Well, maybe we want to know how these scores compare with another country. What if we wanted to, well, we can pull up another country. Let's take Argentina's near neighbor, Brazil, and we can see, well, largely the same sort of profile. Not pretty bad on opportunity, not terribly good on deterrence, or not good on deterrence. Pretty good on transparency, decent on oversight, but nothing to write home about. One thing we've included here, just for convenience, is a little compare button. If you click on that, you'll see it changes to the name of the country you have selected, and then you can go ahead and select another country, and that just allows you to switch back and forth between one and the other if you really just want to say, okay, between these two countries, what's the difference? One thing you can see here, at least according to the World Bank, Brazil only requires an average of 1.3 visits or meetings with tax officials, which is almost as good as it gets. So that you know, along with the senior management time and the export compliance hours, that gives Brazil a bit of an edge, a significant edge when it comes to interaction. Whereas Argentina, 8.61 visits with tax officials, and senior management is a bit worse, documentary compliance for export a bit worse. And collectively, that ends up putting Argentina pretty far out in terms of interaction. This little button here that appears whenever I click on one of these, that's going to take us to the next screen we'll look at. I just wanted to quickly note, on all of these other screens, you can select any country and that same button will appear saying jump to select country, and that will take you to this page for that country, and you can look at how all of the data points appear that feed into the given country scores. Let's go back to Brazil here. Jump to subdomain trends. Now this, let me back up a bit. The matrix is designed to present information about our best understanding of the current bribery risks in a country. It is not intended to give a comparison over time. So if someone says, well, Brazil's score in 2014 was this, its score in 2016 was this, and now its score in 2018 is this, why has it changed like that? Does that mean it's gotten better or worse? My only answer to that would be it might, or it might be a reflection in the changes that we've made to the methodology. And we do make changes pretty much every year, some greater, some lesser in significance, but that's because we learn more about what helps us understand better the nature of bribery risk. The last thing we want to do is get locked into a particular model for the sake of a supposed consistency and not be able to adapt when we learn that we're able to provide better information. But we still do want to be able to say what has changed in a country. So what we've decided to do here is actually provide access to how the underlying numbers have changed over the years. Now, remember all that time we spent talking about standard deviations. This is why I was paying attention to that. Each one of these charts reports the trends for each of these data points, color-coded, with the indicators listed here. It reports them in terms of standard deviations from the mean, how far away they are from the average score for all countries in the given year in question. In this case, going all the way back to 2001. So the first thing you want to look at over here is the scale and where the numbers are. Again, big numbers mean more risk. Low numbers mean less risk. If countries are underneath 0, that's good. If you see them climbing up above 0 towards 1 or even 2 or even higher, that should be considered a bad sign. A quick word about mean type. I've currently got dynamic selected. All that means is that for each year, the country's score in that year, as provided by the source that's associated with the given indicator, is being compared to the average of all scores for that indicator for that year. So that tells you how a country's conditions are changing relative to all other countries. But maybe you want to know, has the score itself changed? In that case, you're going to want to click on static. And what that will do is it will be comparing each year's score to the mean for the most recent year. So you're going to see a lot more straight lines here. So procedures to get electricity those haven't changed for Brazil since 2010, apparently. But if you look at how those compare to the average, you can see, they're getting a little bit worse, which suggests the rest of the world is getting a little bit better along those lines. Now, that is not a dramatic example, but it is an illustration of the difference between dynamic and static, just so you're aware of that. But this can be used here. If you're looking at one country, you can check out all of the subdomains, and you can see how things have been changing. So this one's interesting. In Brazil, expectation has never been, that's always been a contributor to the bribery risk in Brazil. It looks like there's one data point back here in 2009. The World Bank seems to have found that there was a low percent of firms experiencing at least one bribe payment request. At the same time, bribery depth, the number of public transactions where a gift or informal payment was requested, that was very high. And we can see that if we take a look back at countries and back at Brazil and look at expectation. This is a very dramatic difference here. Usually these two go hand in hand. Mongolia, they're more or less the same. We were looking at Argentina earlier. Well, there too. That shows the same trend. And again, that's unusual. To me, that suggests that the problem in Brazil is that bribery is extensive, or at least in the time period in which this data was collected, it is an extensive, even pervasive problem, but it's not directed at a lot of, at a large number of firms participating in the economy. It's as though it is only directed at a few targeted companies, which, read the news and come to your own conclusions if that's a reasonable outlook. That's what we're trying to do in providing this information, isn't to provide any definitive answers to any of these questions, why the numbers are the way they are, but to give context and history, just in terms of the numbers, that will help you sort of think for yourself about what might be causing this, what this might mean, and how it might relate to your own compliance efforts. On the theory that more information is better and more thinking and more particularized thinking is better. In any event, you can see that there is an overall trend from about 2003 up until 2005. You have pretty much all of the annual indicators here, including whether civil justice is free of corruption, whether there's corruption between administrations and foreign businesses, the degree of favoritism in decisions by government officials. All of these numbers, again, per the assessment of the institutions that provide these numbers, went up largely in sync, and then seem to have largely stabilized from 2015 to 2016, and then maybe since then, at least the couple that we have more recent data for, may be dropping, maybe getting a little bit better again. So again, hard to predict what what might happen down the road, but seeing these trends can help inform your understanding of the actual conditions on the ground. You can do the same pretty much with all of these. A lot of the time there's going to be not much change. Other times there will be market changes. It looks like publicized laws and government data had 2 years of dramatic improvement from 2014 to 2016. Again, it would take some research to understand what that reflects, but it's worthy of note. So this is something that, again, go to matrixbrowser.traceinternational.org and please start playing with it yourself. Take a look. See what each country's profile looks like. Really try to understand what it means. Don't just take sort of the initial ranking as somehow containing some sort of gospel truth. Take a look at the country, understand where the numbers are coming from, understand what has happened to the numbers over time. Always keep an eye on this scale here, because New Zealand may seem to be going down and up and all over the place here, but it's all within a range of from, you know, quite good to extremely good. So that's always important to keep in mind. You may even have some countries where the span here is only from, you know, negative 1.2 to negative 1.3, which means things are totally stable, but the way the chart is generated, it wants to use all the space it can. Other times, you may see the high end being 3, even 4 standard deviations worse than normal, or 3 standard deviations better than normal, and then you know you've got some real changes going on of some sort or another. What those changes mean and how they will affect your compliance efforts, that is for you to decide, but we here at TRACE hope that you find the Bribery Risk Matrix to be useful in informing your efforts, and that you find the Matrix data browser an informative and even a fun way to really come to understand that data a lot better for yourself. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about it. We're always happy to have feedback on it. And, you know, there's always room for improvement in everything we do. So please let us know. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.